This is Local Matters on CBS 17 News at 4.
North Carolina's public school system is going to have a new leader starting in a little more than a week or so, and Democrat Mo Green won the November election in the race against Republican Michelle Morrow.
The current superintendent of schools, Catherine Truitt, recently sat down with CBS 17's Russ Bowen to talk about her four-year tenure. And Russ, she started out with a challenge the whole nation was facing.
She sure did. We were in the middle of a pandemic, or the beginning of it, really, something students are still recovering from. But Superintendent Truitt says that didn't stop some major achievements in education. So when you were first elected, of all the Council of State seats, other than the governor's perhaps, you probably had the biggest challenge of all. It was the middle of a pandemic or the beginning of a pandemic. You had, roughly 1.5 million staff plus students across North Carolina. Looking back, how hard was it really? What were we not seeing in the public eye that was really happening behind the scenes? And is there anything you learned from that differently in another pandemic or something like that?
Yeah, what a great question. So I would say that the hardest thing about it was that we were starting a new administration and students were not in school. And I don't think any other state superintendent could say that students were not in school when she came into office. It became priority one immediately for us to not just reopen schools, but do it in a way that allowed for local control and for that flexibility of communities coming together with their local health directors to make the best decisions for those individual communities. And I don't really have anything that I would do differently because I feel like it was a success. We were able to work with the governor's office, with DHHS, and then with the legislature to first allow for that kind of local control approach to opening. And then I believe eventually the legislatures passed bills that required all schools to open. But I think it was the right decision to focus on that first and foremost because I see every day what the data looks like for children in academic recovery coming out of the pandemic.
So what is happening as far as academic recovery? Because they're still recovering.
Yes, they are still recovering. So North Carolina students have seen 3 years in a row of post-pandemic academic recovery. The first thing that we did probably in March, April of 2021 was to create the Office of Learning Recovery, which was a body that was able to look at all of our students' testing data, figure out where they should have been had there been no pandemic, and then we gave all of that data to local superintendents and said, here's where your students are down to a student. And by the way, here are some interventions that we know will work, and here's what we recommend. And as a result, and also because of our science of reading legislation, which has to do with how we teach students to read, all subjects across all grades have seen some kind of recovery, some more than others, but virtually all subjects, all grades, have had 3 years in a row of post-pandemic recovery.
Now, there have been some critics who question EOG rates versus graduation rates. How do you mediate that, and how do you exactly explain that?
Well, I'm one of those critics. I think that high school graduation rates are important to look at, but they're not a proxy for post-secondary success for students. I say that because we have something like I think now an 89% high school graduation rate, and yet only about 67% of kids are, 67% of 8th graders are starting high school not reading or doing math proficiently. So how are all of these kids graduating from high school and we're saying that they're college and career ready? I also look at data that shows only about 1/3 of kids are getting any training and education beyond high school by the time they're 24. So we're graduating a lot of kids from high school, but do they have a plan when they graduate? Are they employed, enlisted, or enrolled in some sort of post-secondary institution when they graduate from high school and by the time they're 24? We're just not ensuring that enough students have a life after high school. High school cannot be the end. It has to be the beginning.
How much of this is attributed to what we didn't have as kids? Social media, text, cell phones, just not interested in reading an actual chapter book. All of these things which were fundamental all summer and all throughout the school year. Is that part of it, what's happening outside the classroom itself, or is it solely on, what's happening within that teacher's classroom?
Yeah, I think there's a multitude of factors, and certainly there are a lot of folks right now researching this phenomenon of, are kids less able to pay attention in class? There is a new study that shows that college professors are saying that kids are unable to read an entire novel. They can't do sustained reading for long periods of time. And I think it does have something to do with social media being a distraction, for sure. And we know that the social media absolutely is impacting students' mental health. But I also think that it goes back to this issue that we have in this country with the way that we teach reading, that the Excellent Public Schools Act that was passed in April of 2021 is designed to remedy. And that's to say that as a nation, we moved away from phonics in the 90s as a country and to the whole language, which is using words and visual clues and pictures to teach kids to read, which doesn't work. That is not how the brain learns to read. We are course correcting. We are using phonics now by law to teach students how to read. And we're seeing incredible gains in our kindergarten through third graders reading skills. So we know that this is eventually going to filter up to our older students.
What's next for Catherine Truitt?
Well, I wish I could tell you with certainty what is next. What I can tell you is that I will continue to work in North Carolina on the education issues that matter most. And I feel like after the past 4 years and having spent a lifetime working in education, that I know what those issues are, and I hope I can continue to be a value add to the state of North Carolina and its students and families.
Well, as part of the media, it's been great working with your administration.
You as well, Russ.
And we really appreciate your time and your transparency and for spending some of your last days with us here in the studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
So it'll be interesting, guys, to see what happens in the course of the next several semesters. Coming up tomorrow, we'll hear from outgoing State Treasurer Dale Folwell. And next week, newly elected Congressman Brad Knott, and several other interviews as well, guys.
All right, Russ, thanks very much. Very interesting stuff there.